Paragraph 30. This is the ultimate question UFC 330 answers. Can the length hold off the grappling, or does Islam control the canvas? Can the youth and speed of GARRY overcome the systematic dominance of Islam Makhachev? The analysis suggests Islam wins this fight. Multiple analysts suggest Islam wins this fight. But GARRY is a legitimate threat in the sense that he possesses the physical tools to execute a game plan that could work. The problem is executing that game plan against the most suffocating grappler in the sport, a man who has spent his entire career studying exactly how to dismantle fighters with GARRY's exact attributes. Islam doesn't lose to confidence. Islam doesn't lose to physical tools. Islam loses to nothing. And that's why, when the octagon door closes, everyone watching will understand exactly why Islam Makhachev is pound-for-pound royalty. But here's what people miss about Islam's recent striking evolution. After his fight with Jack Della Maddalena, Islam indicated a shift toward more aggressive finishing intent. He's not satisfied with just controlling rounds anymore. He wants finishes. He wants stoppages. This is significant because Volkanovski wonders if Islam might abandon his patient striking approach and instead force aggressive action to the ground earlier than typical. If Islam senses that standing exchanges are opening takedown entries, he might pressure more vertically, might create earlier clinch opportunities. Against a fighter like GARRY, who respects the striking exchange, this could be the difference between a 5-round decision and a submission finish in round 3. But the strike-heavy narrative needs dismantling immediately. People say Islam's striking is weak. Chael Sonnen challenges this false dichotomy with surgical precision. Islam Makhachev has lost one striking exclusive round in his entire career. There is no recorded instance of Islam being outclassed in the striking department against anyone ever. Does Islam prefer grappling? Yes. Is his grappling significantly more dominant than his striking? Absolutely. But the assumption that world-class wrestling equates to subpar striking is mathematically impossible. Islam beat Alexander Volkanovski in a standing exchange. Islam held his own tit-for-tat with Dustin Poirier. These aren't the fights of a liability on the feet. Paragraph 24. The welterweight division's current state matters contextually. GARRY has bulldozed his way through that division, yes, but the welterweight division at 170 pounds has a specific culture. It's driven by strikers. It's driven by volume. It's driven by range-based fighters. Islam is the rare exception, a grappling-dominant fighter who competes at a championship level in a striking-dominant division. This is why his presence feels alien at times. This is why his victory margins feel suffocating. He's operating under a different set of rules, and his opponents have to adapt their entire framework to compete. GARRY will attempt that adaptation. It will fail because Islam doesn't allow adaptation time. Paragraph 28. The submission finishing angle deserves deeper analysis. Islam has 10 submission victories in his professional career. He doesn't get submitted. He submits people. If he takes GARRY down, the clock starts ticking toward either a submission or a round victory through grappling control. Volkanovski specifically mentioned the rear naked choke as a finish possibility, and that requires only that Islam establishes back control, which he will. GARRY's height can work against him here. It's harder for tall fighters to escape back control. The leverage angles become difficult. This is why Aspinall mentioned that GARRY's height, while an advantage on the feet, becomes neutralized once Islam is in grappling range. Paragraph 27. Chael Sonnen identifies another critical element of this matchup. If Islam truly is that weak of a striker as the narrative suggests, then why has every elite striker in the division trained specifically to defend against his clinch and grappling rather than looking for stand-up exchanges? The answer is simple. Islam's striking is sufficient to close distance, and that's all he needs. He doesn't need to be Dustin Poirier in the striking department. He needs to be competent enough to move forward and set up clinch entries. Against GARRY, who respects the striking exchange, this becomes even simpler. Islam will land early shots, GARRY will respect those shots, and in the moment of respect, Islam enters the clinch. Sterling identifies the shortcut to Islam's victory immediately, pinning GARRY against the fence. Once Islam gets his opponents back against the cage, the Dagestani grappling system becomes operational at full capacity. The fence neutralizes lateral movement. The fence eliminates sprawl angles. The fence becomes Islam's co-fighter. And from that position, dragging GARRY to the mat becomes a simple matter of leverage. But Sterling also identifies GARRY's one viable counter: make the clinch unbearable. Eye strikes, nose shots, grinding elbows to sensitive areas. Force Islam to be uncomfortable in the clinch before he can establish control. Let's address the elephant in the room: GARRY's pre-fight mentality. He's loud, he's confident, he's created a narrative around himself that resembles Conor McGregor's early run. The problem with that narrative is Conor McGregor hasn't lost to grappling dominance since moving to higher weight classes. Conor faced Floyd Mayweather in boxing, not MMA. And even in MMA, Conor's wrestling IQ allowed him to avoid the clinch against grapplers for most of his elite run. Garry is trying to do something Conor did with slightly different tools, and against an opponent who is significantly more experienced in the clinch than anyone Conor faced in his prime welterweight run. Islam dismisses Garry's psychological warfare entirely. The face-offs, the call-outs, the Instagram posts, all of it is noise. Islam's composure before fights is ice. He doesn't engage in the back and forth because he doesn't need to. His eyes in the face-offs reveal nothing because there's nothing to reveal. Garry is looking for a reaction, looking for a moment where Islam breaks character. Islam isn't in character. He's just existing at a different psychological frequency. He's already run through the fight 100 times in the gym. He knows exactly what's coming. Garry's confidence reads as nervous energy to a man who has eliminated fear from his pre-fight mentality. Garry's counter is equally methodical but fundamentally different in execution. He needs to exploit his height advantage consistently. He needs to use his footwork to laterally shift and avoid Islam's pressure vectors. He needs to land strikes on the retreat, not desperation strikes, but calculated shots that keep Islam at distance while accumulating significant damage. The Irish fighting spirit is real, but the Irish fighting spirit means nothing when you're face down on the mat with a rear naked choke incoming. Garry needs to marry aggression with precision, which is easier said than executed against a man who has faced every type of striker in the division. And yet Ian Garry is no ordinary opponent. At 26 years old, he moves like water on the feet. His range management borders on elite. His distance judgment creates angles that most fighters at 170 pounds simply cannot execute. He's 6'3", 6 inches taller than Islam. His reach advantage, his youth, his fresh legs with minimal damage accumulated, these aren't minor details. These are legitimate structural advantages that could neutralize Islam's entire entry game if executed with surgical precision. For the first time in years, Islam faces a stylistic challenge that the analytics actually favor. Tom Aspinall sees something in this fight that casual observers miss. He talks about the invisible factor that decides elite-level grappling exchanges. Physical strength, and not the kind you can see on highlights. The kind that reveals itself only when two elite athletes lock eyes in a clinch. Aspinall says once Makhachev grabs hold of you, you're done. Dustin Poirier has said it. Justin Gaethje has said it. Multiple world-class fighters have reported that Islam Makhachev is the strongest person they've ever fought. That's not hyperbole in the realm of pound-for-pound analysis. That's a documented physical advantage that doesn't show up on camera. Paragraph 23, but here's the statistical reality. Islam has taken down virtually everyone at welterweight and lightweight. His takedown success rate is among the highest in modern MMA. The fighters he hasn't taken down extensively are the ones whose grappling defense is elite, and Ian Garry, while competent, hasn't faced a clinch wrestler of Islam's caliber. Garry has faced good grapplers. He hasn't faced Islam. And that difference is precisely why Aspinall uses the word toughest, but still picks Islam to win the fight. It's not that Garry can't win. It's that the stylistic advantages favor Islam by an overwhelming margin. But let's zoom out. Tom Aspinall, the heavyweight champion, says this might be Islam's toughest fight we've seen in recent memory. Stylistically, Garry is a bad matchup. He's long, he's rangy, he moves exceptionally well. He rarely gets taken down and held there. He's young, he's fresh. He carries minimal damage. These are the markers of a generational athlete. But then Aspinall pivots. In my opinion, pound for pound, he's Islam in the argument. Once he gets hold of you, you're done. Aspinall is essentially saying Garry has the best defensive attributes to avoid Islam's grappling, but Islam's physical dominance is so overwhelming that it doesn't matter. The narrative around Islam's clinch work needs contextual grounding. Islam's clinch isn't just wrestling. It's MMA-specific clinch methodology refined by the entire Dagestani system over decades. It's different from pure judo clinch work, different from pure wrestling clinch methodology. It's designed to create discomfort for striking-based fighters. It's designed to set up off-balance takedowns. It's designed to neutralize speed advantages. When Garry steps into the octagon, he's not fighting a wrestler who clinches like a wrestler. He's fighting a mixed martial artist who has integrated clinch work into a complete grappling system. Paragraph 29, the final 10 minutes of this fight, should it go that distance, are essentially predetermined. Islam has shown time and time again that as fight duration increases, his dominance increases. His cardio is immaculate. His pressure wrestling methodology compounds round after round. Garry might stay fresh, but staying fresh means nothing when you're defending takedowns every 20 seconds. Staying fresh means nothing when you're defending submissions from bottom positions. By round 3, Garry will either have escaped the grappling completely or he'll be dealing with accumulated fatigue from grappling exchanges. Neither scenario favors his victory. When Garry sensed what he interpreted as nervous energy from Islam in the face-off, he was actually sensing focus. There's a difference. Nervous energy is scattered, reactive, defensive. Focus is compressed, intentional, offensive. Islam's demeanor pre-fight doesn't change based on who's across from him. He walks the same walk. He holds the same stare. He carries the same composure. Garry's interpretation of that, as nervousness, reveals more about Garry's own state of mind. He's looking for confirmation that Islam is affected, when Islam has simply moved beyond the need for psychological confirmation. The throne of mixed martial arts sits occupied by a man who doesn't celebrate it. Islam Makhachev has ascended to pound-for-pound kingship not through noise, not through Instagram callouts, not through manufactured drama. He has earned it through the most brutal, most suffocating grappling exchanges this sport has ever seen. And now, at the absolute peak of his powers, a challenger emerges. Ian Garry, the Irish prospect who has steamrolled his way through the welterweight division with a confidence that mirrors a young Conor McGregor. But here's the problem: Makhachev doesn't lose fights to confidence. He loses fights to nothing. Volkanovski's analysis extends to a critical technical detail. Garry's distance management is elite, but it's built on a framework of lateral movement and footwork adjustments. But what happens when an opponent doesn't allow the space for lateral movement? What happens when Islam closes distance so efficiently that lateral footwork becomes impossible? This is where Garry's range advantage becomes theoretical rather than practical. Islam isn't trying to beat Garry's range on the feet. Islam is trying to eliminate the possibility of Garry utilizing his range by making the clinch the preferred battle zone. Alexander Volkanovski breaks down the path to victory with the precision of a man who has faced Islam across the octagon. Volkanovski's framework is simple. Islam will be patient. Islam will not waste energy on what isn't there, but Islam will eventually get the takedown, and once he does, the fight is over in terms of rounds. Volkanovski doesn't see Islam getting a quick finish, but he sees the champion dictating the scorecards through grappling control and the real possibility of a submission, specifically a back control situation, where Garry's height becomes a liability rather than an asset. Paragraph 25. Islam's mindset heading into this fight is worth examining. He's not searching for validation anymore. He's already defeated everyone meaningful at lightweight. He's moved to welterweight and immediately challenged for the title. He's double champion. He's pound-for-pound elite. What remains for Islam is legacy maintenance. Can he defeat the next generation of strikers? Can he maintain dominance across multiple generations? These are legacy questions, not doubt questions. Islam doesn't have doubt questions anymore. He has legacy questions. Garry is the next test in that legacy project. Here's what makes this prediction dangerous for Garry, though. Islam has spent the last 3 years specifically training in clinch methodologies with world-class partners. Islam has studied exactly this scenario. Islam has incorporated cardio training specific to fighting a man of Garry's dimensions. He's adjusted every variable imaginable. And still, Islam acknowledges that Garry is a skilled fighter. He acknowledges the threat. He just doesn't respect the delivery mechanism. Which is to say, he thinks Garry is trying too hard to be a character, and that's where mental space gets wasted. Let's examine Garry's most viable path to victory with complete honesty. He needs to stay off his back for 25 minutes. He needs to score volume on the feet, particularly in the early rounds before Islam's pressure accumulates. He needs to land counterstrikes as Islam closes distance. He needs to utilize his jab to maintain separation. He needs to mix kicks to the body and head to keep Islam honest about forward pressure. And if he gets taken down, he needs scramble-heavy wrestling that Islam hasn't necessarily faced at this elite level. This is possible. Unlikely, but possible. Khabib's father told Islam something years ago that became the foundation of his entire career. When Khabib retired, you have to take this belt. That wasn't a suggestion, that was a mandate, and Islam answered it. He sits at 34 years old, double champion at welterweight and lightweight, carrying the legacy not just of a fighter, but of an entire system. The Dagestani wrestling methodology that has destroyed everyone placed in front of it. But Garry's problem isn't the age, isn't the experience. It's the physicality underneath all of it. Islam himself acknowledges one critical adjustment for this fight: cardio training matching Garry's volume and dimensions. At 5'11" with Garry at 6'3", Islam needs to breathe differently, move differently, pressure differently. Islam isn't dismissing the size disparity. He's acknowledging it and building specific adaptations. This is the mark of championship maturity. Young fighters sometimes see size and get demoralized. Elite fighters see size and adjust methodologies. Islam is adjusting. The psychological dimension here cannot be overstated. Garry is trying to establish himself as the dominant mental force. He had a face-off the night before where everything was supposedly on display. He's waiting for the ceremonial face-off, believing that's where he can assert psychological dominance. But Islam has already moved past the psychological warfare phase. Islam is already in the octagon. For Islam, every moment now is preparation, not performance. This mindset differential is enormous at elite levels. Paragraph 26: Garry's mentality is younger, fresher, hungrier, but that hunger can become a liability. Young fighters sometimes press too hard. Young fighters sometimes overestimate their advantages. Young fighters sometimes lack the patience to execute intricate game plans when things aren't going as expected. In the first round, if Garry gets taken down even once, the psychological dimension shifts. He's no longer the narrative setter. He becomes the reactive fighter. And reactive fighters cannot beat Islam Makhachev. This is the core of the matchup tension. Garry's entire strategy revolves around avoiding the clinch, maintaining distance, scoring with lateral footwork, and if necessary, utilizing kicks to keep Islam at range. It's a beautiful game plan on paper, but Islam doesn't enter the fight trying to convince you of his game plan. Islam enters the fight enacting it immediately, pressure walking from the opening bell. Not reckless, not aggressive in a wild sense, but suffocating pressure that converts space into confrontation. Islam's technical game plan, as revealed in his training breakdown, is brutally simple. Step to the cage and dictate what happens. Control who moves forward and who moves backward. Control the pace. Control the distance. Control the clinch. From the clinch, wait for Garry to either commit to striking, which opens takedown opportunities, or wait for Garry to try and escape, which also opens opportunities. This is the definition of suffocating MMA. It's not explosive, it's not highlight reel, it's methodical destruction. What Islam's striking actually is: calculated, patient, designed to set up entries. It's not flashy, it doesn't generate highlights, but it's effective enough to close distance against elite strikers, which means against Ian Garry's more traditional boxing framework, Islam's clinch work becomes the gateway drug to everything else. And that's where Aljamain Sterling enters the analysis with a clearer picture of what Garry actually needs to execute.